The sound of hoofbeats echoed through the narrow canyon as Thomas Ashford rode hard toward home, the saddlebags filled with gold dust weighing heavy on his horse, only to find his brother's wagon already loaded with his belongings, and his wife sitting beside him wearing her finest traveling dress and a smile he had never seen her give him. Thomas pulled his mare to a stop, dust swirling around the animal's legs as he stared at the scene before his modest ranch house. The afternoon sun beat down on Twin Falls, Idaho, making the air shimmer with heat this summer day in 1878. His wife of 3 years, Margaret, sat straight-backed on the wagon bench, her blonde hair pinned up beneath a new hat he had never seen before. Beside her, his younger brother James held the reins with a confidence that made Thomas's stomach turn. "What is this?" Thomas's voice came out rougher than he intended as he dismounted, his boots hitting the packed earth hard. James had the decency to look uncomfortable, though he did not meet Thomas's eyes. "Brother, I did not want it to be this way." Margaret, however, showed no such hesitation. She lifted her chin, and Thomas saw something in her face he had never noticed before. Greed. Pure, undiluted greed. "Thomas, you know as well as I do that this life you have been building is not enough. 3 years I have waited. 3 years of living in this tiny house, wearing mended dresses, going without the things other women have. I just brought home $2,000 in gold," Thomas said, gesturing to his saddlebags. 2 months working the claim near Boise. "That is more than enough to expand the house to buy you whatever you want." Margaret laughed, a brittle sound that carried no warmth. "James told me about the claim you found. The real one. The one you have been keeping secret. He said it could be worth $50,000 or more." Thomas's jaw tightened. He had told James about the new strike in confidence, had even offered to split it with him once he had secured the claim properly. "So you told my wife about it. And what? Convinced her to run off with you?" "She deserves better than what you can give her," James said, finally meeting his brother's eyes. "I have already filed the claim in my name. You were too slow, too cautious. That gold is mine now, and Margaret wants to be with a man who knows how to seize opportunity." The betrayal hit Thomas like a physical blow. His own brother, his own wife, the 2 people he had trusted most in the world. He stood there in the dusty yard, watching as James snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. Margaret never looked back, not even once. Thomas watched until the wagon disappeared around the bend in the road, heading toward the main trail that would take them south. His hands shook as he unsaddled his horse, mechanically going through the motions of caring for the animal while his mind struggled to process what had just happened. Everything he had built, everything he had worked for, had been taken from him in the span of a single conversation. Inside the house, evidence of Margaret's departure lay everywhere. She had taken her clothes, her jewelry, even the good china that had belonged to Thomas's mother. The rooms felt hollow, empty in a way that went beyond missing possessions. Thomas set the saddlebags of gold on the kitchen table and stared at them. $2,000. It had seemed like such a fortune just hours ago. Now it felt like nothing. He spent that night sitting on the porch, a bottle of whiskey beside him, watching the stars wheel overhead. By morning, he had made his decision. He would sell everything. The ranch, the livestock, all of it. Twin Falls held nothing for him now but bitter memories. He would head west, maybe to Oregon or California, and start over where no one knew his name or his shame. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of transactions. Thomas sold the ranch to a family newly arrived from Missouri, accepted their fair offer without haggling. He sold most of the livestock to neighboring ranchers, kept only his best horse, a sturdy gelding named Copper, and a pack mule to carry supplies. By the end of September, He was riding west with everything he owned packed on that mule, following the Snake River toward whatever future awaited him. The trail took him through rough country, high desert that stretched endlessly beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Thomas rode from dawn until dusk each day, stopping only when necessary, pushing himself and his animals hard. He wanted distance between himself and his old life. He wanted to ride until the memory of Margaret's cold smile faded, until the sting of James's betrayal dulled to something bearable. 3 days out from Twin Falls, he passed through a small settlement called Hammett, hardly more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings. He bought supplies and moved on, following the river west. The land grew rougher, more desolate. Sagebrush and scrubgrass gave way to rocky outcroppings and steep canyon walls. Thomas saw few other travelers, just the occasional freight wagon or prospector heading east toward the mining country. On the 5th day, his mule went lame. Thomas had been pushing too hard, he knew it, but the need to keep moving had overridden his better judgment. He examined the animal's hoof and found a stone bruise, nothing that would not heal with rest. But rest was a luxury he could not afford here in the middle of nowhere. He redistributed the packs, loading what he could onto copper and caching the rest, marking the spot carefully so he could return for it later if he chose to. Then he led both animals on foot, moving slowly to spare the mule further injury. By evening he spotted smoke rising from a hollow between 2 hills. Thomas approached cautiously, his hand on the rifle strapped to his saddle. As he drew closer, he saw a small cabin, barely more than a shack really, built against the hillside. A garden plot struggled in the rocky soil, and a few chickens scratched in a makeshift pen. Outside the cabin, a woman worked at a washboard, scrubbing clothes in a large tub. She looked up as Thomas approached, and he saw her hand move to something beside the tub. A shotgun, probably. He stopped a respectful distance away and called out, "Good evening, miss. I mean no trouble. My mule has gone lame and I was hoping I might water my animals at your creek there." The woman straightened, and Thomas got his first good look at her. She was younger than he had first thought, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was faded and patched but clean, and her face, though wary, showed none of the hardness he had expected to see in a woman living alone in such rough country. "You can water them," she said, her voice cautious. "But then you best move on. I've got no hospitality for strangers." "I understand, miss. I will be quick about it." Thomas led his animals to the creek that ran past the cabin, letting them drink their fill while he filled his canteens. He could feel the woman watching him, that shotgun probably still within easy reach. He did not blame her for the caution. As he finished filling the second canteen, one of the chickens squawked loudly. Thomas looked up to see a coyote darting toward the pen. Without thinking, he dropped the canteen and grabbed his rifle, bringing it smoothly to his shoulder. The shot cracked across the hollow, and the coyote dropped mid-stride, dead before it hit the ground. The woman stood frozen by the washtub, the shotgun now in her hands but not raised. She stared at the dead coyote, then at Thomas, something shifting in her expression. "That is the third one this week," she said quietly. "They have been getting bolder." Thomas walked over to the coyote and dragged it away from the chicken pen. "You will probably have more. Once they learn there is easy prey here, they keep coming back." "I know." The woman lowered the shotgun. "I have lost 4 chickens already." Thomas studied the pen. The fence was makeshift, boards and chicken wire poorly secured. "This will not keep them out. You need the fence higher and the wire buried at the base. Coyotes will dig under if they can." "I know that too," the woman said, and there was a flash of something in her voice. Pride, maybe, or defensiveness. but I have not got the materials or the help to do it right." Thomas should have left then. He had his own troubles, his own destination to reach, wherever that might be. But something in the woman's face stopped him, some combination of pride and exhaustion and stubborn determination that he recognized, because he had seen it in the mirror often enough himself. "I could fix it for you," he heard himself say. "Payment for the water and for letting me camp nearby tonight. My mule needs rest anyway." The woman studied him for a long moment, and Thomas could see her weighing the risks. A strange man, armed and clearly running from something based on the haunted look he knew he must be carrying. But she was practical too, he could see that, and the fence needed fixing. "All right," she said finally, "but you camp over there by that stand of cottonwoods, not near the cabin, and I am keeping this shotgun loaded." "Fair enough, miss. Deborah Vance," she said, "and it is Mrs., not Miss. Though my husband has been dead these past 2 years. Thomas Ashford, and I am sorry for your loss." Deborah nodded curtly and returned to her washing. Thomas set up his camp where she had indicated, unsaddled Copper and unloaded the mule, then set about tending to the lame hoof. He made a poultice from plants growing by the creek and wrapped it carefully. The mule would need at least 2 days of rest, maybe 3. He hoped Deborah Vance would allow him to stay that long. As the sun set, he walked back to the cabin. Deborah had finished her washing and was hanging clothes on a line stretched between 2 posts. She watched him approach but said nothing. "You have lumber for the fence?" Thomas asked. "Some. In the lean-to around back. My husband cut it before he died but never got around to using it." Thomas found the lumber where she had indicated, along with a decent collection of tools. He worked until full dark, taking down the old fence and beginning to set new posts, digging deep holes and packing them with rocks and dirt. It was good to work with his hands, to have a clear task with a clear purpose. It kept his mind from circling back to James and Margaret, to the betrayal that still felt like an open wound. Deborah brought him a plate of food as he worked, beans and cornbread, simple but well cooked. He thanked her and ate sitting on the ground, too tired to make conversation. She did not seem to expect any, just collected the empty plate when he was done and disappeared back into the cabin. Thomas returned to his camp and fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted from the day's ride and the evening's work. He woke before dawn and was back at the fence as the sun rose, determined to make good on his promise. By mid-morning, he had the new post set and was attaching the wire, making sure it extended a good foot below ground level. Deborah emerged from the cabin carrying a bucket, heading toward the garden. Thomas watched her from the corner of his eye as he worked. She moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to hard labor, no wasted motion. Her garden, he noticed, was better tended than the chicken pen had been. Neat rows of vegetables, carefully weeded. Whoever she was a survivor. "You know your way around a fence," Deborah said, appearing beside him with a cup of water. "You are a rancher," Thomas said, accepting the cup gratefully. The morning was already warm, promising another hot afternoon. "Sold my place a couple weeks back. Where are you headed?" "West." "Have not decided exactly where yet." Deborah nodded, asking no more questions, and Thomas was grateful for that. He returned to his work, and she returned to hers. They moved around each other through the day like 2 people performing a familiar dance, each focused on their own tasks but aware of the other's presence. By evening, the fence was finished, sturdy and high, with the wire buried deep. Thomas stepped back to examine his work and felt a small surge of satisfaction. It was a good fence, one that would keep the coyotes out. "It looks good," Deborah said, coming to stand beside him. "Better than anything Robert ever built, if I am being honest. He was a good man but not much of a carpenter." "Your husband?" "Yes. He died of fever 2 winters ago, left me this place and not much else." She paused, then added, "You can stay another night if you need to. Your mule still does not look like it should be traveling." "I appreciate that, madam. I will pay you for the trouble." "No need. You fixed my fence. We are square." That night, Deborah invited him to eat at her small table inside the cabin rather than bringing a plate out to him. Thomas accepted, grateful for the company even if conversation was sparse. The cabin was clean but sparse, just one room with a bed in the corner, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. No luxuries, no comforts beyond the basic necessities. "How do you manage out here alone?" Thomas asked, spooning up stew thick with vegetables from her garden. "Carefully," Deborah said. "I sell eggs and vegetables to travelers passing through. Sometimes I take in washing. There is a ranch about 10 miles south, and the owner's wife pays me to do their laundry every few weeks. It is not much, but it is enough. This is rough country for a woman alone. It is rough country for anyone." Deborah met his eyes across the table. "But I've got nowhere else to go. My family is all dead, and I've got no money for a train ticket even if I wanted to leave. This cabin and this land are mine, free and clear. That counts for something." Thomas understood that sentiment better than she knew. "It counts for a lot," he agreed. They finished the meal in companionable silence. Thomas helped wash the dishes, then returned to his camp. As he lay in his bedroll that night, staring up at the stars, he found his thoughts turning not to Margaret and James for the first time in weeks, but to Deborah Vance and her lonely cabin in the hollow. The next morning, Thomas examined his mule and found the animal still favoring the injured hoof. Another day of rest at minimum. He walked up to the cabin and found Deborah already at work, hoeing weeds from her garden. "Mule is still lame," he said. "I hate to impose, but I need to give him one more day." "That is fine," Deborah said without looking up from her work. "But if you are staying, you might as well make yourself useful. That roof has been leaking in 3 places since the spring rains, and I have not been able to get up there to fix it properly." Thomas spent the day on the cabin roof, replacing rotten shingles and sealing gaps with pitch. It was hot work under the September sun, but satisfying in its way. Below him, he could hear Deborah working in her garden, occasionally talking to her chickens. The domesticity of it all struck him as oddly peaceful. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas noticed a rider approaching from the east. Deborah saw him too and straightened, one hand shading her eyes. The rider was a large man on a large horse, and as he drew closer, Thomas could see he wore a gun belt low on his hip. "That is Daniel Corcoran," Deborah said quietly, her voice carrying up to the roof. "He owns the big ranch south of here. Be careful what you say to him." Corcoran rode right up to the garden fence and sat his horse there, looking up at Thomas on the roof with undisguised suspicion. "Who is this, Deborah? A traveler passing through." "He fixed my chicken pen in exchange for camping rights." Deborah's voice was level, but Thomas heard the tension in it. "That's so." Corcoran did not take his eyes off Thomas. "Seems like he has made himself pretty comfortable." Thomas climbed down the ladder slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. Up close, Corcoran was even bigger than he had appeared from a distance, with a florid face and cold blue eyes. A man accustomed to having his way. "Just helping out in exchange for hospitality," Thomas said evenly. "I will be moving on tomorrow. See that you do." Corcoran finally turned his attention to Deborah. "I came by to remind you about our conversation last month. My offer still stands. $500 for this place, cash money. That is more than fair for a patch of rocky ground and a falling-down cabin. The cabin is not falling down, and I have told you I am not selling." Deborah's hands were clenched on the hoe handle, her knuckles white. "You are being foolish, woman. You cannot keep this place going on your own. Sooner or later, you will have to accept reality." Corcoran leaned forward in his saddle. "I am trying to be generous here, but my patience has limits." I said, "No, Mr. Corcoran. The answer has not changed and it will not change." Corcoran's face darkened, but he seemed to become aware of Thomas standing nearby, watching. He pulled his horse's head around sharply, making the animal dance. "We will talk again soon, Deborah. Real soon." Then he spurred his horse and rode off at a gallop, leaving dust hanging in the air. Deborah stood rigid until Corcoran was out of sight, then her shoulders slumped. "He has been after this land for months. His ranch borders mine, and he wants to expand his water rights. The creek runs through here before it reaches his property." "He seemed pretty determined," Thomas said carefully. "He is. And he is not a man who takes no for an answer." Deborah looked at Thomas directly. "That is why I was so cautious when you first showed up. Corcoran has sent men around before, trying to scare me or catch me in a vulnerable position. I have to assume every stranger might be one of his hired hands." Thomas felt anger kindle in his chest. A man like Corcoran, using his power to bully a woman alone. It was the kind of injustice that made his blood boil. "Has he tried anything directly?" "Not yet. But he is getting pushier. Last month he suggested that if I would not sell, I might consider becoming his mistress. Said he would set me up in a nice house in town." The disgust in Deborah's voice was clear. "I told him I would rather eat dirt than accept anything from him." "Good for you," Thomas said, meaning it. They stood in the fading afternoon light, two people carrying their own burdens, their own pain. Then Deborah straightened her shoulders and picked up her hoe. "I've got work to finish before dark. That roof looks much better, thank you." Thomas returned to his camp that evening, but his mind kept circling back to Deborah and her situation. A woman alone, being pressured by a powerful man who clearly had no scruples. It was wrong, and everything in Thomas rebelled against simply riding away and leaving her to face it alone. But what business was it of his? He had his own troubles, his own path to follow. Deborah had survived 2 years on her own. She was tough, capable. She did not need him playing hero. Still, sleep did not come easily that night. The next morning, Thomas's mule was moving better, the limp barely noticeable. He could leave with a clear conscience, knowing the animal would not be permanently damaged by pushing on. He packed his camp methodically, loading the mule with practiced efficiency. Deborah was gathering eggs when he led his animals up to the cabin. She straightened, a basket of eggs on her arm, and something flickered across her face. Disappointment, relief. Thomas could not read it. "You are heading out," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, the mule is better." Thomas paused, then pulled out a leather pouch from his saddlebag. "I want to pay you for the hospitality. You have been more than kind." "I said that was not necessary. You fixed my fence and my roof. We are even. Please." Thomas held out the pouch. "Take it. I have got more than I need and you can use it." Deborah stared at the pouch for a long moment, then shook her head firmly. "No, I do not take charity, Mr. Ashford. I make my own way." "It is not charity. It is payment for services rendered." "The services were already compensated by the work you did. I will not take your money." Her voice was firm, her pride unmistakable. Thomas understood that pride. It was the same pride that had kept him going through the hard years building his ranch, the same pride that made him put one foot in front of the other, even when grief and betrayal threatened to drag him down. He tucked the pouch back into his saddlebag. "All right, then. I respect that." He gathered Copper's reins. "You take care of yourself, Mrs. Vance, and watch out for Corcoran." "I always do." Thomas mounted and turned Copper toward the west. He rode maybe 100 yards before something made him stop. He sat there, looking at the trail ahead, the empty miles stretching toward an uncertain future. Then he looked back at the small cabin in the hollow, at the woman standing there watching him leave. What was he doing? Riding toward nothing, running from pain that would follow him no matter how far he went. Meanwhile, here was someone who needed help, someone fighting to keep what little she had against a man who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle. Thomas turned Copper around and rode back. Deborah was still standing where he had left her, the basket of eggs clutched against her side. Her eyes widened as he approached. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, the words coming out in a rush before he could second-guess himself. "You need help around here, someone to stand up to Corcoran and keep this place running. I need somewhere to be, something to do besides run from my own mistakes." He took a breath. "What if I stayed? Not permanently, just for a while. I could help with the heavy work, keep Corcoran at bay. In return, you let me camp on your property and share your meals. When you feel secure enough to be on your own again, I will move on." Deborah stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. This is not your fight." "Maybe I am tired of running. Maybe I need a fight that actually means something." Thomas met her eyes. "I am not asking for anything improper. I will keep my camp separate, respect your space. But two people can defend this place better than one, and you know it." He could see her weighing the offer, suspicion warring with practicality. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right. But understand this, Mr. Ashford. At the first sign of trouble, the first indication you are anything like Corcoran or his men, I will put a bullet in you myself. I sleep with that shotgun beside my bed, and I know how to use it. I would expect nothing less, Mrs. Vance." They stood looking at each other for a moment, two wounded souls making an uneasy alliance. Then Deborah nodded toward his camp spot. "You better set your gear back up then. And if you are staying, there is a lot of work to be done." The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Thomas rose at dawn and worked until dusk, repairing what needed repairing, building what needed building. He reinforced the cabin's walls, replaced the worst of the floorboards, built a proper barn for Copper and the mule. Deborah worked beside him when she could, her own projects of garden and chickens and the endless round of domestic tasks that kept a homestead functioning. They spoke little at first, maintaining the cautious distance of two people who had been hurt too many times to trust easily. But gradually, slowly, they began to open up. Deborah told him about her husband Robert, a dreamer who had dragged her west with promises of a fresh start, only to die and leave her with nothing but debt and this hardscrabble patch of land. Thomas told her about Margaret and James, the betrayal still raw but somehow easier to speak about here, to someone who had no connection to his old life. "You are better off without her," Deborah said one evening as they sat on the cabin steps watching the sunset. "A woman who would choose gold over loyalty is no woman worth having." "I know that in my head," Thomas said, "but my heart is taking longer to figure it out. Hearts are stupid that way." Deborah picked up a stick and drew patterns in the dirt. "When Robert died, part of me was relieved." "Is that terrible? He was a good man, but he was also weak. He could not face reality, always chasing some dream just over the horizon. I loved him, but I also resented him for leaving me in this situation." "That is not terrible. That is honest." They sat in companionable silence, and Thomas realized he felt more at peace than he had in months. There was something healing about the simplicity of this life, the honest work and straightforward purpose. As October arrived, bringing cooler weather and the first hints of winter, Corcoran appeared again. This time, he brought two men with him, both wearing guns. Thomas was working on the barn roof when they rode up. "Mrs. Vance," Corcoran called out, not bothering to dismount. "I see your hired hand is still here. That must be costing you." Deborah emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Mr. Ashford is a partner, not a hired hand, and his presence here does not change my answer. I am not selling. Corcoran's face hardened. The creek is running low this year. I need that water for my cattle. You have got a dozen chickens and a garden patch. I've got 500 head of stock. You do the math. The creek runs through my property. My late husband's claim is legally filed and recorded. You have got no right to that water. Legal does not always mean right, Deborah. Corcoran's voice dropped to something ugly. And accidents happen out here. Cabins burn. People go missing. Thomas climbed down from the barn roof slowly, his hand drifting toward the rifle leaning against the wall. Corcoran's men noticed the movement, their own hands moving toward their guns. I think you should leave now, Thomas said quietly. Before this goes somewhere it should not go. Corcoran turned his attention to Thomas, looking him up and down dismissively. I do not know who you are, stranger, but you are making a mistake getting involved in this. I am offering good money for this worthless patch of dirt. That is more than fair. The lady said no. Time to respect that and move on. One of Corcoran's men, a lean man with a scarred face, grinned nastily. You figure you can take all three of us, cowboy? I figure you have got more to lose than I do. Thomas's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. I have already lost everything that mattered. What have you got to lose? Your job, your boss's respect, maybe your life. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then Corcoran laughed, a sound without humor. You are a fool, Ashford. Both of you are fools, but I can be patient. He pulled his horse around. The first hard freeze, you will be singing a different tune. We will see how brave you are when winter sets in. They rode off, and Thomas watched until they disappeared over the ridge. When he turned back, Deborah was standing very straight, her face pale but composed. That was dangerous, she said. He will not forget this, I know, but backing down would have been worse. Thomas picked up his rifle. He is testing boundaries, seeing how far he can push. We had to push back. We. Deborah repeated the word softly. When did this become we? Thomas realized what he had said. He looked at Deborah, really looked at her, and saw not just a woman in need of help, but someone he had come to respect deeply. Someone strong and principled, someone who faced her troubles head-on with courage and determination. Someone who reminded him of who he had been before Margaret's greed had poisoned everything. I suppose somewhere along the way, he said honestly, if that is all right with you. Deborah held his gaze for a long moment, then a small smile touched her lips. Yes, I think it is all right with me. That night, Deborah invited Thomas inside for supper as she had been doing regularly, but something was different. There was a new awareness between them, a recognition of what had been slowly building through the shared work and conversations. They ate quietly, but the silence was charged with unspoken thoughts. Why did you really stay? Deborah asked finally, setting down her fork. The truth, Thomas. Thomas considered his answer carefully. Because I saw someone worth fighting for, not the land, not the property. You. You stand there facing down a man with 10 times your resources, with nothing but your pride and your principles, and you do not flinch. That is rare. That is worth protecting. I am not some damsel in a story book. I do not need rescuing. I know that. You are the strongest person I have met in a long time. Thomas leaned forward. But everyone needs someone in their corner. Everyone needs to know they are not fighting alone. And maybe I needed that too. Maybe I needed to remember what it feels like to stand for something that matters. Deborah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I was so angry when Robert died. Angry at him, at God, at the whole world. I told myself I did not need anyone, that I was better off alone. But these past weeks, with you here, I have remembered what it is like to have a partner. Someone to share the load with. Then let me stay, not as a hired hand or a temporary helper, as a partner, truly. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, rough and calloused from work. I am not offering riches, Deborah. I have got $2,000 in gold, a horse, a mule, and whatever I can earn with my back and hands. But I can offer you loyalty. I can offer you someone who will not run when things get hard, who will stand beside you no matter what Corcoran or anyone else throws at us. Are you asking what I think you are asking? Deborah's voice was barely above a whisper. I am saying I want to stay if you will have me. And somewhere down the road, when enough time has passed, when we are both ready, maybe we could make it permanent. But for now, I just want to be here with you, building something real. Deborah turned her hand over and gripped his. I do not love you, Thomas, not yet. It is too soon for that, for both of us. I know, but I think I could love you given time. I think maybe I am already starting to. I think I could too. Deborah smiled, genuine and warm, and Thomas felt something in his chest loosen, some tight knot of pain beginning to unravel. So we take it slow. We see where this goes. Slow is good. I have had enough rushing into things to last a lifetime. They sat there holding hands across the table as the lamp burned low. Two damaged people finding the courage to try again. The first snow came in mid-November. Light flurries that dusted the ground and melted by afternoon. Thomas had spent the past weeks preparing for winter, stockpiling firewood, reinforcing the barn, and helping Deborah preserve everything from her garden that could be preserved. They worked in easy tandem now, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with glances and small gestures as much as words. Thomas had moved his camp closer to the cabin as the weather turned cold, setting up a tent near the barn. It was warmer there, more protected, but he still maintained the separation he had promised. Some evenings they sat together in the cabin after supper, talking until late. Other times, Thomas played his harmonica while Deborah mended clothes or knitted, the domestic scene filling some hollow place inside him he had not realized was empty. Corcoran did not return, but they saw his men occasionally, riding the boundary of the property, always watching. Thomas made sure to always be armed when he went outside, and he taught Deborah to shoot his rifle in addition to her shotgun, wanting her to have options if trouble came. You are a natural, he said one afternoon as she hit the target he had set up for the 5th time in a row. Better than most men I have known. Robert taught me to shoot. It was one of the few useful things he did. Deborah lowered the rifle. He said every woman west of the Mississippi needed to know how to defend herself. I guess he was right about that much. As December arrived, bringing heavier snows and bitter cold, the cabin became their shared refuge. Thomas still slept in his tent, but he spent more and more time inside with Deborah, helping with indoor tasks, reading aloud from her small collection of books, teaching her card games his father had taught him. They were building something between them, a foundation of friendship and respect that felt solid in a way his relationship with Margaret never had. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Deborah looked up from the shirt she was mending and said, "My birthday is next week. I will be 26. We should celebrate," Thomas said immediately. "I will ride into Hammett, get supplies for a proper meal, maybe find a gift. You do not have to do that. I want to." When is the last time you had a real birthday celebration? Deborah thought about it. Robert was still alive, so 3 years ago at least, and even then it was not much, just a store-bought cake. Then it is settled. As soon as this storm breaks, I am going to town. The storm lasted 3 days, pinning them inside with only brief ventures out to care for the animals. Thomas moved into the cabin during the worst of it, sleeping on the floor by the stove while Deborah took the bed. It felt strange and right at the same time. this forced intimacy that somehow remained chaste and respectful. On the second night, unable to sleep, Thomas found Deborah awake as well, staring at the ceiling. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I was thinking about Christmas. Robert and I always went to the church in Hammett for Christmas service. I have not been since he died." She rolled onto her side to face him. "Would you go with me this year? It seems less lonely with someone beside you." "I would be honored." They talked quietly through the night, sharing memories of past Christmases, of family traditions and childhood dreams. Thomas told her about his parents, both gone now, and the Christmases of his youth in Missouri, before his family had come west. Deborah spoke of growing up in Ohio, of sisters lost to fever and a mother who had worked herself into an early grave. "We are both orphans in our way," Deborah said as dawn light began to filter through the window. "Making our own family as we go." "I like that," Thomas said. "Making our own family." When the storm broke, Thomas rode into Hammett with a list Deborah had made of necessary supplies. But he had his own agenda too. He bought flour and sugar, coffee and salt, all the practical items on her list. Then he visited the small general store and found a length of blue fabric, good quality wool that would make a warm dress. He bought a tin of peaches, a luxury, and a small bottle of vanilla extract for baking. And in a case behind the counter he saw a cameo brooch, delicate and beautiful, probably left by some traveler short on cash. "How much for the brooch?" he asked the storekeeper. $20. "It is real ivory, carved in Italy." Thomas did not hesitate. He counted out the gold coins, knowing Deborah would protest the extravagance but wanting to give her something beautiful, something that said she was worth more than just practical necessities. He returned to find Deborah in the barn, milking the cow they had acquired from a passing farmer. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up in a way that made his heart skip. "You made it back safely. I was starting to worry." "The trails are clear enough now. Heavy snow, but passable." Thomas began unloading the supplies. "I have got everything on your list, plus a few surprises for your birthday." "Thomas Ashford, you better not have spent too much money." "Define too much," he said with a grin. Deborah finished with the cow and came to examine the packages. She immediately spotted the blue fabric and gasped. "Thomas, this is too fine. This must have cost a fortune." $8. "That is hardly a fortune. $8 would feed me for a month. Consider it an investment." "I am tired of seeing you in dresses that are more patch than original fabric." Thomas pulled out the tin of peaches. "Besides, I have got a selfish motive. I am hoping you will make a pie with these." Deborah laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "You are impossible, but yes, I will make a pie." On her birthday, Thomas woke early and started a fire in the stove, letting Deborah sleep late for once. He made coffee and fried eggs, set the table with her good dishes, and placed the wrapped brooch beside her plate. When she emerged, still in her nightdress and wrapper, she stopped and stared. "What is all this?" "Happy birthday, Deborah." She sat down slowly, looking at the small feast he had prepared. Then she noticed the package. "Thomas, you already gave me the fabric. Open it." Deborah unwrapped the brooch carefully, and when she saw it, tears spilled down her cheeks. "It is beautiful. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever owned." "You deserve beautiful things." Thomas knelt beside her chair. "You deserve so much more than this hard life has given you." Deborah set the brooch down carefully and cupped his face in her hands. "I do not need riches, Thomas. I have learned that the hard way. What I need is someone who sees me, truly sees me, and values me for who I am. Someone who shows up and stays, who does the work even when it is hard. That is worth more than all the gold in Idaho." Then she kissed him, soft and sweet, a first kiss that felt like a promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "So we are really doing this?" Thomas asked. "Taking this chance? we are really doing this." Deborah picked up the brooch and pinned it to her wrapper. "How do I look?" "Like the richest woman in the territory," Thomas said, and meant it. The joy of that day carried them through the rest of the hard winter. As Christmas approached, they rode into Hammett together for the church service, sitting side by side in the small wooden pews. Deborah wore her new blue dress, which she had stayed up late sewing, and the brooch at her throat. Thomas wore his best shirt and pants, had even trimmed his beard. They sang carols together, their voices blending, and afterward the congregation welcomed them warmly, several people commenting on what a fine couple they made. On the ride home, Deborah said, "People were assuming we are married. Does that bother you?" "No. But maybe we should make it true, sooner rather than later, for propriety if nothing else." Thomas pulled Copper to a stop and turned to face her. "Is that a proposal, Mrs. Vance?" "I suppose it is, Mr. Ashford, unless you have objections." "Not a single one." Thomas leaned over and kissed her, not caring that they were in the middle of the snowy trail where anyone could see. "As soon as we can arrange it, let us make this official." They were married in the same church 2 weeks later, on a cold, clear day in early January 1879. The preacher performed the ceremony, and several townsfolk served as witnesses. Deborah wore her blue dress again and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers Thomas had somehow found in Hammett. Thomas wore the same clothes from Christmas, but he had bought a simple gold band for Deborah's finger, using the last of his gold from Twin Falls. "I, Thomas, take you, Deborah, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. This I promise, before God and these witnesses." Deborah repeated her own vows, her eyes never leaving his, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by cheers and applause. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, truly together for the first time. It was awkward and sweet and everything a wedding night should be. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Deborah whispered, "I love you, Thomas Ashford. I did not think I could love again, but I do. I love you." "I love you too, Deborah Ashford." Thomas kissed her forehead. "And I promise you, I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." "You already have," she said, and fell asleep with her head on his chest. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of domestic contentment. Thomas and Deborah settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They had already spent months learning each other's habits and quirks, so the transition felt natural. Thomas took over the heavier work around the homestead while Deborah managed the household and her small enterprises. Together, they made plans for the spring, talking about expanding the garden, maybe buying a few pigs or another cow. In March, Corcoran appeared again, riding up to the cabin with his usual escort of hired guns. But this time, his expression was different, more calculating than angry. "I heard congratulations are in order," he called out as Thomas emerged from the barn. "You married the widow Vance, Mrs. Ashford now," Thomas corrected, positioning himself between Corcoran and the cabin. "And thank you, though I doubt you rode out here just to offer best wishes." "Perceptive." Corcoran leaned forward in his saddle. "I am prepared to make a new offer. $1,000 for the property, and I will throw in a section of land I own near Boise. Better land, more water, closer to civilization. You could build a real ranch there." Thomas felt a flicker of surprise. That was a generous offer, far more than this small homestead was worth in pure dollar terms. But he knew what lay beneath it. Corcoran was not being generous, he was getting desperate. "Not interested," Thomas said flatly. "My wife and I are happy here." "Do not be a fool, Ashford. That is more money than you will see in 10 years of scratching at this dirt. Take the offer and walk away while you can still walk." "Was that a threat?" Corcoran smiled coldly. "Just friendly advice. Accidents happen, fires, floods, equipment breaks, animals die, life out here is unpredictable." "You are right about that." Thomas crossed his arms. "Unpredictable things do happen. For instance, a man's ranch could burn down if someone decided to report certain irregular dealings to the territorial marshal. I hear there has been some question about your water rights on the south end of your property, about whether you filed those claims legally or just took what you wanted." Corcoran's face went red. "You are making accusations you cannot prove. Maybe. Or maybe I have been asking questions in Hammett, talking to folks who remember when you first came to the territory. People have long memories, Corcoran, and they talk, especially when someone new shows interest." Thomas let his words hang in the air. "So here is my friendly advice. Leave us alone. Stop trying to buy or bully us off our land. Because if anything happens to my wife or our property, if there is any accident or mysterious fire, I will make it my life's work to look into every claim you have got, every deal you have made, every corner you have cut. And I will not stop until I have either cleared your name or seen you in jail, your choice which it is." The two men stared at each other, neither blinking. Finally, Corcoran pulled his horse's head around savagely. "You have made an enemy today, Ashford. I had an enemy before today. Now you know I am willing to fight back." Corcoran and his men rode off at a gallop. Thomas stood watching until they were out of sight, his heart pounding. It had been a bluff, mostly. He had asked some questions in Hammett, but he had no real evidence of wrongdoing. Still, men like Corcoran often had secrets, and the threat of exposure might be enough to make him back off. Deborah came out of the cabin, her face pale. "I heard all that. Do you think he will leave us alone now?" "I think he is going to think twice before making another move. And that gives us time to strengthen our position, maybe find real evidence if it exists." Thomas put his arm around her. "We are going to be all right, Deborah. I promise you that." True to his word, Corcoran did not return. Spring came, and Thomas and Deborah threw themselves into the work of the homestead. They expanded the garden, built a proper chicken coop with room for more birds, and bought 2 young pigs from a farmer passing through. Thomas also began riding into Hammett more regularly, making connections with other ranchers and homesteaders, building a network of allies who could be called on if Corcoran tried anything. In late April, Deborah came to him as he was repairing fence line and said, her voice quiet and uncertain, "Thomas, I think I am with child." Thomas dropped his tools and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been sick most mornings." She looked up at him anxiously. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy, Deborah, I am overjoyed." Thomas kissed her soundly. "We are going to have a baby, our baby. God, I cannot believe it." They told no one else yet, wanting to wait until Deborah was further along. But the knowledge colored everything, adding new urgency to their work on the homestead. Thomas began building an addition to the cabin, a second room that could serve as a nursery. Deborah started sewing baby clothes, her needle flying through tiny gowns and blankets. In June, they rode into Hammett so Deborah could see the doctor there. He confirmed what they already knew. The baby would come in late November, a healthy pregnancy so far. On the ride home, they talked excitedly about names and futures, about the life they were building together. "I want our children to have what I never did," Deborah said. "A home, security, parents who love each other in them." "They will have all that," Thomas promised. "And more. We will make sure of it." But fate, it seemed, had one more trial in store for them. In mid-July, a stranger rode up to the homestead. Thomas was in the barn when he heard the horse, and he came out to find a well-dressed man sitting a fine black stallion, looking around with interest. "Help you?" Thomas called out, his hand automatically checking for the gun at his hip. "Looking for Thomas Ashford," the stranger said. He was young, probably mid-20s, with a professional air about him. "You found him." "My name is Samuel Porter. I am a lawyer out of Boise." Porter dismounted and pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "I have been looking for you for weeks, Mr. Ashford. This concerns your brother, James Ashford." Thomas felt his stomach drop. He had not thought about James or Margaret in months, had pushed them so far from his mind they might have been characters in someone else's story. "What about him?" "He is dead, Mr. Ashford. He and his wife were killed 2 months ago when their wagon went off a cliff during a storm." "I am sorry to bring you such news." Thomas stood frozen, trying to process this information. James dead. Margaret dead. He waited for some feeling to surface, grief or anger or satisfaction, but all he felt was a strange emptiness. "I see," he said finally. "Thank you for letting me know." "There is more." Porter held out the paper. "Your brother left a will. He named you as his sole heir. Everything he owned passes to you, including the claim he filed near Boise, the one that caused your rift, I understand. He told you about that. He told me many things as I drew up his will. He was not a happy man, Mr. Ashford. He said he had made a terrible mistake, that the gold and the woman were not worth what he had given up." Porter paused. "The claim has produced nearly $30,000 in the past 6 months. That money is in a bank account in Boise, along with another $8,000 in cash and property. It is all yours now." Thomas took the paper with nerveless fingers. $30,000. A fortune. More money than he had ever imagined having. The very gold James and Margaret had betrayed him for, now his by default. "I do not want it," Thomas heard himself say. Porter blinked. "I beg your pardon. I do not want the money. Give it to charity. An orphanage, a church, I do not care. Just do not give it to me." "Mr. Ashford, I understand you are in shock, but this is a significant sum. Perhaps you should take some time to consider." "I have considered." Thomas looked toward the cabin, where Deborah was visible through the window, hanging laundry inside. "I have everything I need right here. That gold, it is tainted. It cost me my wife and my brother. I will not build my life on it." "Then what about the claim itself? The mine is still producing. You could sell it, use the money for something good." Thomas thought about that. The claim James had stolen from him, that Margaret had wanted so desperately. There was a certain justice in having it returned to him, but he did not want to work it himself, did not want anything to do with it. "Sell the claim," he said finally. "Use the money to establish a fund for widows and orphans in the territory. Women like my wife, who have lost their husbands and need help to survive. Can you do that?" Porter studied him with new respect. "I can. I will need your signature on some documents, but yes, I can establish such a fund." "Then do it, and consider your fee paid from the proceeds." They conducted their business right there in the yard, Thomas signing where Porter indicated. When it was done, the lawyer mounted his horse and looked down at Thomas. "You are either a very wise man or a very foolish one, Mr. Ashford." "I have not decided which." "Neither have I," Thomas admitted. "But I know this. The happiest I have been in my whole life has been these past months in this cabin with my wife, building something with our own hands. That gold would not make us happier. It might even destroy what we have. So I choose this life over that fortune every single time." Porter tipped his hat. "Then I wish you well, sir. You are a rare man in this world." Thomas watched him ride away, then walked slowly to the cabin. Deborah met him at the door, her face concerned. Who was that? What did he want? Thomas told her everything. James and Margaret's death, the fortune, his decision to give it away. Deborah listened in silence, her eyes growing wide. When he finished, she said quietly, $30,000, Thomas. That is enough to buy a real ranch, to build a big house, to never worry about money again, and you just gave it away. I did. Are you angry? Deborah was quiet for a long moment. Then she took his hands in hers. No, no, I am not angry. I am proud. Proud that I married a man who knows the difference between wealth and riches. Because you are right, Thomas. What we have here, what we have built together, that is real wealth. And no amount of gold could buy what we have found. Thomas pulled her close, feeling the slight swell of her belly between them. I love you, Deborah Ashford. I love you too, Thomas Ashford, more than you could possibly know. They stood there in the doorway of their small cabin, holding each other, while the summer sun blazed overhead and the future stretched out before them full of promise. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Thomas's life. He and Deborah fell into a rhythm, their days full of work and laughter and quiet evenings together. As Deborah's pregnancy advanced, Thomas took on more of her usual tasks, insisting she rest and take care of herself. She protested but complied, spending her days sewing for the baby and planning for the future. In September, word reached them through Hammett that Corcoran had sold his ranch and left the territory. The rumors said he had gotten into financial trouble, that some of his water claims had indeed been challenged, and he had chosen to cut his losses rather than fight. Whether Thomas's threats had played a role, he never knew for certain, but the result was the same. The threat was gone, and they could truly relax. We are free of him, Deborah said, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Free to build our life in peace. That we are, Thomas agreed. And speaking of building, I have been thinking, what would you say to buying some of Corcoran's old land? The bank is selling it off in parcels. We could expand, maybe run some cattle. With what money? We barely have enough to get through the winter as it is. I sold the claim James stole, remember? I gave most of it away, but I kept back a small amount, just $1,000, for emergencies or opportunities. This seems like both. Deborah looked at him with raised eyebrows. You kept money back and did not tell me. I wanted to surprise you. Was that wrong? No, you ridiculous man. It was not wrong. Deborah laughed. Buy the land if you think it is a good investment. I trust your judgment. So Thomas bought 200 acres adjacent to their property, good grazing land with access to a second creek. He immediately began making plans for the spring, when he could buy a few head of cattle and start building a herd. They would not be rich, but they would be comfortable, and their child would grow up on a real working ranch. November arrived with the first hard freezes, and Deborah's time drew near. Thomas arranged for the doctor from Hammett to come stay at the cabin when her labor started. He also asked several women from town to be present, wanting Deborah to have experienced help around her. The labor began on a cold night, just before Thanksgiving. Thomas paced outside while the women worked inside, his heart in his throat every time he heard Deborah cry out. It seemed to go on forever, hours stretching into an eternity. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. One of the women, Mrs. Patterson, came out to the porch. You have a son, Mr. Ashford, and your wife is doing well. You can come in now. Thomas stumbled inside to find Deborah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. He knelt beside the bed and looked down at his son, at the tiny red face and miniature fingers. He is perfect, Thomas breathed. Deborah, he is absolutely perfect. We made him together, Deborah said softly. Our son. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at the baby, Deborah said, What about Robert, after my first husband. He was not perfect, but he deserves to be remembered. And James as a middle name for your brother. Despite everything, he was your blood." Thomas felt his throat tighten. To name their son after the two men who had failed them in different ways, but who had also shaped who they were. It felt right, a way of honoring the past while building a new future. "Robert James Ashford," he said, testing the name. I like it very much." Little Robert was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and slept in stretches long enough for Deborah to recover her strength. Thomas took over all the household tasks those first weeks, cooking and cleaning and caring for both his wife and his son. He had never imagined he could feel such fierce protective love, such overwhelming joy at the simple fact of this tiny person's existence. By Christmas, Deborah was back on her feet, though still taking things easy. They celebrated quietly in the cabin, just the three of them, with baby Robert sleeping in a cradle Thomas had made. Thomas gave Deborah a pair of fine leather boots he had ordered from Boys, and she gave him a new coat she had sewn herself. They sang carols softly so as not to wake the baby, and Thomas thought about how different this Christmas was from the previous year, when they had been tentatively building their relationship. Now they were a family, complete and whole. "I keep thinking about what you said all those months ago," Deborah murmured as they sat together by the fire, "about how you had lost everything that mattered." "I remember," Thomas said, his arm around her shoulders, baby Robert sleeping against his chest. "You were wrong, you know. You had not lost everything. You had lost the wrong things, the things that did not matter, so you could find the right things, the things that did." Thomas kissed her hair. "You are absolutely right. If Margaret had not left, if James had not betrayed me, I never would have ridden west. I never would have found you. In a strange way, I owe them both a debt. Their betrayal led me to the greatest blessing of my life." "Ours," Deborah corrected. "The greatest blessing of our lives." The winter passed peacefully, the three of them cocooned in their small cabin while snow fell outside. Thomas continued to plan for the spring, corresponding with cattle dealers and making lists of supplies they would need. Deborah slowly regained her strength and figure, nursing their son and managing the household with quiet competence. In March, as the snow began to melt, Thomas made his first cattle purchase. 20 head of mixed stock, a small herd but a solid start. He hired 2 young men from Hammett to help him drive the cattle to his land and begin building the infrastructure they would need. Corrals, shelters, feed storage. It was back-breaking work, but satisfying in a way mining gold had never been. This was building something lasting, something he could pass down to his son. By Robert's first birthday in late November of 1880, the ranch was well established. The herd had grown through breeding and additional purchases to nearly 40 head. Thomas had bought a larger wagon and more equipment. They had hired a permanent hand, a young man named Peter who lived in a small bunkhouse Thomas had built near the barn. The cabin itself had been expanded, adding not just the nursery but also a proper parlor and a larger kitchen. "You ever miss the old days?" Deborah asked one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the Idaho hills gold and crimson. "When it was just the two of us in that tiny cabin." "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but I do not wish for them back. I like this better. I like watching our son grow, seeing what we have built together. I like looking at that herd and knowing we did that. Every morning I wake up beside you, I feel like the richest man alive." "Even though we are not actually rich," Deborah teased. "Especially because we are not actually rich. We have something better. We have each other. We have Robert. We have this land and this life we have made with our own hands. That is worth more than any gold strike, any fortune. I know because I have been offered both and I chose this. I will always choose this. Deborah leaned her head on his shoulder. I am pregnant again, she said softly. Thomas felt joy surge through him. When? Late spring, I think, May or June. She looked up at him. Are you happy? Deliriously happy. Robert needs a brother or sister, and you are even more beautiful when you are carrying our child. Thomas pulled her close. We are building our own dynasty here, Deborah Ashford, our own legacy. With love instead of gold, she murmured. With love instead of gold, he agreed. Their second child, a daughter they named Eleanor Ann, was born in June of 1881, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and sent sheets of rain across the land. Unlike Robert's birth, this one was quicker, easier, though no less miraculous to Thomas. He held his daughter for the first time and marveled at her tiny perfection, at the delicate features that were so clearly Deborah's. We make beautiful children, he said, making Deborah laugh despite her exhaustion. We do indeed, but I think 2 is enough for now. Let us focus on raising these 2 before we add any more mouths to feed. Agreed, Thomas said, though privately he thought he would happily have a dozen children with this woman if she would permit it. Robert, at nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle and watch her with solemn eyes, occasionally reaching out to touch her tiny hand. Ellie, he would say, his version of Eleanor, and Deborah and Thomas would exchange amused glances over his head. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1883, they had a herd of over 100 cattle, employed 3 full-time hands, and Thomas was considering buying more land. They had built a proper ranch house, large and comfortable, with separate bedrooms for the children, and a parlor where Deborah could entertain the other ranch wives who had become her friends. They were respected members of the community, known for their honesty and their generosity. Thomas often thought about the fund he had established with James's gold, how it had helped dozens of widows and children over the past few years. That money had done more good in the world this way than it ever would have sitting in his bank account. One summer evening in 1884, as Thomas was putting 5-year-old Robert and 3-year-old Eleanor to bed, Robert asked, "Papa, why do not we have as much money as Mr. Henderson?" Henderson was a neighboring rancher, a man who had struck gold and turned it into a cattle empire. "We have plenty of money," Thomas said, tucking the blanket around his son. "We have everything we need. But Mr. Henderson has a bigger house and more horses, and he told me his children will inherit a fortune someday." Thomas looked at his son's serious face and chose his words carefully. "Robert, I want to tell you a story. Before you were born, before I married your mother, I had the chance to own a gold claim worth many thousands of dollars, more money than you could count. But I gave it away because I realized something important. Fortune is not the same as riches. Fortune is just money, gold and silver and paper. It comes and goes. But riches, true riches, are what you build with your own hands and your own heart. Love is riches. Family is riches. A life lived with purpose and integrity is riches. And by that measure, son, we are the wealthiest family in all of Idaho." Robert thought about this seriously, his young face scrunched in concentration. "So we are rich in love." "Exactly. And that kind of wealth never runs out. You can spend it every day of your life and there will always be more." Thomas leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we are going to ride out and check the north pasture, just you and me." "Really?" Robert's face lit up. "I can help with real ranch work. You are 5 years old. It is time you started learning the business." Thomas ruffled his son's hair. "Someday, this will all be yours and Eleanor's. I want you to know every inch of it, to love it the way I do." After tucking in Eleanor as well, Thomas returned to the parlor where Deborah sat sewing by lamplight. He settled into his favorite chair and watched her work, the needle moving in steady rhythms through fabric. "Robert asked why we are not as rich as the Hendersons," he said. Deborah looked up, her eyes amused. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That we measure wealth differently in this family." "Good." Deborah set down her sewing. "Thomas, I have been thinking. We should write down our story, preserve it somehow for Robert and Alina and any grandchildren we might have someday. Not for pride or vanity, but so they know where they came from. So they understand the choices we made and why we made them." "That is a good idea," Thomas said slowly. "What do you want to include?" "Everything. Your first marriage and how it ended. My life with Robert Sr., how we met and built this life together. The gold you gave away, all of it. The children should know that their parents were not perfect, that we made mistakes and got hurt and struggled. But they should also know that we chose love over greed, that we built something lasting not with gold but with hard work and commitment to each other." Thomas came to kneel beside her chair. "I love you, Deborah Ashford, more now than the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. I love you too, Thomas. You showed me that a man's wealth is not in his bank account but in his character. You showed me what real love looks like, the kind that does not need riches to prove itself." They sat together in the quiet house, their children asleep upstairs, their ranch stretching out around them in the darkness. Outside, cattle lowed softly in the distance. A dog barked somewhere. The familiar sounds of home. Years passed, bringing their own joys and trials. A drought in 1885 tested them, but they survived it, their careful management and diversification seeing them through. Robert and Alina grew, became teenagers, then young adults. Robert showed a natural aptitude for ranching, while Alina demonstrated a sharp business mind that proved invaluable when dealing with buyers and suppliers. In 1895, when Robert was 15 and Alina 13, they had a third child, an unexpected blessing named Sarah, who arrived during a spring thaw. Thomas was 45 by then, Deborah 42, and they had thought their family was complete. But Sarah's arrival brought new joy, a late gift that delighted them all. "We are starting over," Thomas joked, holding his infant daughter while his nearly grown son looked on with amusement. "Another round of sleepless nights and dirty diapers." "Worth every moment," Deborah said, her face glowing despite her age and exhaustion. "Every single moment." By the turn of the century, the Ashford Ranch was one of the most successful in southern Idaho. Not the largest, not the wealthiest, but solid and respected. Young Robert had married, bringing his bride to live in a house Thomas had built for them on the property. Alina had moved to Boise to attend a women's college, determined to get an education before deciding on marriage. Sarah, at 5 years old, was the darling of the ranch, spoiled by her older siblings but kept grounded by her parents. Thomas and Deborah were in their 50s now, their hair touched with silver, their faces lined by years of sun and wind and hard work. But their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other. Their hands still found each other automatically when they sat together. The love that had begun in shared struggle and mutual respect had only deepened with time. "You ever wonder what happened to Margaret?" Deborah asked one evening as they sat on their porch, a ritual they had maintained for over 20 years. "Or think about what your life would have been like if she had not left." "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but not with regret. If she had stayed, I would have built something comfortable but empty. A successful ranch maybe, but without the heart this place has, without you, without our children. Margaret wanted gold. I wanted something to believe in. We were never going to make each other happy." "She showed you what you did not want," Deborah said softly, "so you could recognize what you did when you found it. And you showed me that love does not need riches. It just needs commitment and presence and a willingness to do the work, day after day. Thomas took her hand, still roughened from work despite their relative prosperity. You showed me that the measure of a man is not what he owns but what he builds, not what he takes but what he gives. We showed each other, Deborah corrected. I was drowning when you rode up that day, Thomas. Drowning in loneliness and fear and stubborn pride. You threw me a rope and pulled me up, but I threw one to you too. We saved each other. That we did, Thomas agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together. In the distance, they could hear young Robert calling to his wife, Eleanor's laughter floating from the main house where she was visiting, Sarah singing as she played in the yard. The sounds of family, of legacy, of a life well lived. If you could go back, Deborah asked suddenly, to that moment when Margaret left with James and change it, would you? Thomas thought about it seriously, really considered the question. No, he said finally. I would not change a single moment, because every moment, good and bad, led me here. To you, to our children and grandchildren, to this life. I was a fool back then, chasing gold and calling it success. I had to lose everything to realize what really mattered. You are not a fool anymore, Deborah said, squeezing his hand. Thanks to you, Thomas replied. Thanks to you. As the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, filling the vast Idaho sky with their ancient light, Thomas Ashford counted his blessings. Not in dollars or acres or head of cattle, though he had all of those in satisfying measure, but in the woman beside him, the children they had raised, the legacy of love and integrity they would leave behind. He had started with nothing, lost what little he had, and been given a second chance by a strong woman who had needed him as much as he needed her. In the end, that was the real fortune. Not the gold he had given away, but the life he had built in its place. A life where love did not need riches to prove itself, where success was measured in sunsets watched together, and children tucked into bed and honest work done with honest hands. Thomas Ashford had learned the hard way that some things are worth more than gold. And having learned it, he had built a life that proved it, every single day. The ranch would endure long after he was gone, passed down through generations of Ashfords who would know their heritage not as a fortune made, but as a family built on love and hard work, and the courage to choose what mattered most. And in that enduring legacy, Thomas Ashford had found the only wealth that truly lasted, the kind that lived in hearts rather than bank accounts, the kind that multiplied when shared rather than diminishing, the kind that could never be stolen or lost or squandered, the kind that needed no riches at all. Years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, by births and deaths, and all the ordinary miracles that make up a human life. Thomas and Deborah aged together gracefully, their bond only strengthening as they faced the challenges that came with growing older. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, the ranch house filling with the sound of young voices during holidays and family gatherings. In 1910, Thomas suffered a serious illness that had Deborah worried sick. She sat by his bedside for days, cooling his fever and forcing broth between his lips. When he finally recovered, weak but alive, the first words he spoke were, "Still here, still with you." "Thank God for that," Deborah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am not ready to let you go yet, Thomas Ashford. Good, because I am not ready to leave. We have got more sunsets to watch together." And they did many more. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, then their 35th, surrounded by their sprawling family. Young Robert had given them 4 grandchildren. Eleanor had married later but happily, to a teacher from Boys, and they had 2 children. Sarah had married a neighboring rancher's son and lived close by with her 3 children. The Ashford Ranch had become a family empire, not in the sense of wealth but in the sense of legacy, a place where multiple generations worked together and shared in the prosperity they created. In the spring of 1912, as Thomas and Deborah sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, Deborah said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first day you came back and asked to stay?" "Which part?" Thomas asked, his voice rusty with age but still warm. "You said you needed a fight that actually meant something, that you were tired of running." Deborah leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture unchanged by the decades. "Did you find it? The fight that meant something?" "I found everything," Thomas said simply. "Everything I was looking for without knowing I was looking for it. You know what the funny thing is? I thought I was rescuing you that day, offering you help and protection. But you were the one who rescued me. You showed me what love actually looks like. Not the needy, grasping thing Margaret called love, but real love. The kind that builds instead of takes, that gives instead of demands." "We rescued each other," Deborah said, repeating words that had become a refrain through their years together. "That is what partners do." As the afternoon sun slanted across the porch, and their great-grandchildren's laughter filled the air, Thomas thought about the young man he had been, riding hard toward home with saddlebags full of gold, expecting a hero's welcome and getting betrayal instead. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life. But Thomas was grateful to him, grateful he had had the courage to leave, to start over, to open his heart when another woman offered him a different kind of wealth. The gold James and Margaret had coveted was long gone, spent on good works through the fund Thomas had established. But the life he and Deborah had built together endured, growing stronger with each generation. That was the real treasure, the one that could not be stolen or squandered. The treasure of love freely given and freely received, of work done together, of a life built not on fortune but on integrity. Thomas and Deborah lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, a milestone celebrated by a gathering so large they had to hold it in the yard of the main ranch house. Family came from across Idaho and beyond, 3 generations of Ashfords plus all the friends and neighbors whose lives the couple had touched over the decades. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, and through it all, Thomas and Deborah sat together, hands clasped, surrounded by the living proof that they had chosen well all those years ago. 50 years, Thomas said wonderingly as they prepared for bed that night, exhausted but happy. "Half a century, Deborah. Can you believe it?" "Every year was worth it," Deborah said, her voice still strong despite her 76 years. "Every single one, even the hard times." "Especially the hard times," Thomas agreed. "Those were the years that taught us what we were made of." They climbed into bed, and Thomas pulled Deborah close, marveling that he still felt the same thrill of contentment at her nearness that he had felt as a younger man. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. "Thomas," Deborah whispered into the darkness, "if I could go back and choose any life, any path, I would choose this one. Every time, I would choose you." "And I would choose you," Thomas murmured against her hair. "No riches needed, just this, just us." They fell asleep like that, together as they had been for 50 years, as they would remain for whatever time God granted them. 2 people who had found wealth not in gold but in each other, who had built an empire not of money but of love, who had proven that the best treasures in life were the ones you could not hold in your hand but only in your heart. The story of Thomas and Deborah Ashford would be told and retold in their family for generations to come. A reminder that true wealth is measured not in what you have but in what you give, not in what you take but in what you build, not in the gold you mine but in the life you make with your own hands and heart. And every time the story was told, it would end the same way, with an aging couple on a porch, watching the sunset over land they had fought for and earned, surrounded by the laughter of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, rich beyond measure in the things that truly mattered. In the end, that was all any of us could hope for, to be loved and to love in return, to build something lasting, to leave the world a little better than we found it. Thomas and Deborah Ashford had done all that and more, proving that sometimes the greatest treasure comes not from a gold mine, but from a heart brave enough to choose love over riches, every single time.